Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to your space, Virgo, Virgo. And I hope you're doing better. Okay, so let's go, Virgo. Misunderstood. That is the word at the center of this reading, and I want to place it there deliberately before everything else because it changes the entire quality of what follows. Not rejected, misunderstood, the specific, consequential, this produced real harm but not from real indifference quality of something that went wrong, not because the feeling was absent, but because the expression of it failed to carry the feeling accurately. Because the distance between what was felt and what was communicated was wide enough that what arrived on your side bore almost no resemblance to what was sent from theirs. You received a rejection. What was sent was something else entirely. Take what is yours today. What resonates, let it reach the place that the apparent rejection left tender. What does not, release it gently. But for those of you who have been living with the specific, heavy, I thought they did not want me weight of what felt like being turned away, this reading is offering something today that the misunderstanding has been denying you. The truth of what actually happened. Let me speak about what rejection feels like from the inside of the person who appeared to be doing the rejecting, because this perspective is the missing piece. The piece that, when it arrives, reframes everything that preceded it without erasing the reality of what it cost. Because the cost was real. The pain of what felt like being turned away is real. And nothing about the true story diminishes that. It simply explains it in a way that changes what the pain was actually about. Soft sigh. What looked like rejection was fear wearing the costume of indifference. That is the honest description of what Spirit is showing me in the energy of this person. Not the cold, I do not want this quality of genuine disinterest. The hot, I want this so much it frightens me quality of someone who encountered something real and responded to the realness by pulling back, by creating distance, by producing in you the experience of being turned away when what was actually happening in them was the opposite of turning away, was the specific consuming, I do not know what to do with how much I feel, this quality of someone who was overwhelmed by the size of what arrived when you arrived. The overwhelm looked like rejection. It was not rejection. It was someone who did not yet have the capacity to stand in the full size of what they felt, who retreated not because the feeling was insufficient, but because it was more than they knew how to carry forward. Who left you with the impression of not being wanted when the actual truth was being wanted more than they knew what to do with? Hear them, because this voice has been trying to find its way to you through whatever channels are available and needs to reach you in the form that is closest to what it actually carries. I never meant to reject you. I need to begin there, not because saying it resolves anything, but because not saying it has been its own ongoing harm. Another day of you carrying a story about what happened between us that is not the true story. And you deserve the true story. even if the true story is uncomfortable in different ways from the story you have been carrying. Even if the true story requires me to say things about myself that are not flattering. You deserve it. What happened was not about you, not in the sense that lets me off the hook for the impact. The impact was real and it was mine to own. But in the specific, honest, this is where it actually came from sense of someone whose behavior in that moment was not a response to who you are or what you offered. It was a response to what being in proximity to you produced in me, which was, and I am saying this as plainly as I can, more than I was ready for, more than I knew how to receive without the specific, embarrassing, now I understand it, was cowardly pulling back that I produced instead. Oh, I felt you, genuinely, completely, in the specific way that certain people are felt rather than simply encountered. And the feeling, the full, unmanaged, this is more than I was expecting size of it, frightened me in a way I did not know how to navigate toward you rather than away from you. So I went away. Not because going away was what I wanted, because staying meant inhabiting the full size of what I felt, and I was not yet capable of that. And the going away produced on your side the experience of rejection, which was not what I intended and is not what was true, but which I created nonetheless, and which I owe you the honesty of naming and owning. I am miserable without you, not in the dramatic, I cannot function sense I function. In the specific daily something is consistently wrong sense of someone who made a choice that looked like self protection and turned out to be self deprivation, who protected themselves from the size of the feeling and discovered in the protection that the size of the feeling was not the problem. The problem was the protection. The problem was choosing the manageable version of a life over the real one and discovering that the manageable version, however comfortable in certain ways, carries the specific and ongoing cost of your absence, which turns out to be a cost I did not fully anticipate and cannot make peace with. Soft sigh. Oh, feel the honesty in that. Because that is not a performance, not the strategic deployment of vulnerability to produce a desired response. That is the specific, humbling, I understand now what I did not understand then quality of someone who has lived with the consequence of their own fear long enough to understand it clearly. Who knows what the pulling back cost? Who is naming it honestly, including the parts that reflect poorly on themselves, because the alternative, which is continued silence, has become simply impossible to justify? Now, I want to speak to you honestly about what receiving this means. Because the specific and complicated experience of discovering that what felt like rejection was not rejection, that what you interpreted as evidence of your own undesirability was actually evidence of your impact, is not straightforwardly simple. It produces things. Relief, possibly, the specific, slightly breathless quality of a weight being lifted that you had been carrying so long you had stopped registering it as a weight. And also, in this matters, grief. The specific grief of understanding that what you lost was not inevitable, that the story you have been carrying, I was rejected, I was not wanted, what I offered was insufficient, is not the true story. And that the true story, while better in certain ways, also contains the specific sadness of time that passed inside the wrong story, of carrying a pain whose real cause was something other than what you believed it to be. Let that grief have its space, not as something to be resolved quickly in the warmth of the reframe, as the legitimate response to a genuine loss of time, of the version of yourself that organized itself around the belief of having been rejected, of the specific quality of how you held yourself in the aftermath of what you now understand was a misunderstanding rather than a verdict. The grief is real. It belongs alongside the relief, and both deserve space. Whew. What comes next, what this reading is pointing toward in the energy of what is forming between you, is a conversation. The specific overdue, this needs to happen in person quality of an exchange between two people who have been living in the aftermath of a misunderstanding and who are finally approaching the moment where the misunderstanding can be directly addressed, not to resolve everything simultaneously, to replace the wrong story with the true one. In the shared space between you, where stories become shared rather than separately held, that conversation changes things, not by erasing what happened. What happened is part of the history, and the history is real. By giving what happened its accurate meaning, by replacing the interpretation that has been shaping how you carry this with the truth that the interpretation was built on insufficient information. And by giving both of you from the accurate foundation of the true story, the specific and genuine choice about what comes next, not the choice made from the wrong story, not the choice made from the belief that you were rejected, which produces a particular quality of guardedness that the true story does not warrant. The choice made from the accurate understanding of what actually happened, of what the pulling away actually was, of what the misery without you actually means, of what is actually available between you when both people are operating from the full truth rather than from the version that fear produced and silence maintained. That choice from the true story with accurate information from the grounded place of someone who knows now what they did not know before is the most important one available to you. And it deserves to be made consciously, with the full quality of your own honest knowing about what you want and what you need and what the true story changes about both. Soft sigh. You were never rejected. You were felt fully in the specific and overwhelming way of someone whose impact exceeded what the other person was prepared to receive, and what they did with that feeling was wrong. Produced the wrong outcome. Cost you something it should not have cost you. And they know this now, are miserable with the knowing. are approaching the conversation that replaces the wrong story with the true one, not from the comfortable position of someone who has not paid for their own fear, but from the specific, humbled, I understand now what I did position of someone who has lived with the consequence of it long enough to understand its full cost. Receive the true story when it arrives, with the grief it warrants and the relief it offers, and the grounded, eyes open discernment of someone who has been through enough to know the difference between honest accountability and the performance of it, who can receive the truth of what happened without either dismissing it in self protection or accepting it without the honest assessment of what it means going forward. You were never not wanted. You were always from the beginning, through the fear, through the pulling back, through every day of the miserable without you wanted. In the full specific, this person and no other way that the misunderstanding obscured but could not eliminate. Whew, that truth is arriving, finally, in the form of someone who has stopped protecting themselves from the size of what they feel and who is coming toward you with the full cost of the misunderstanding visible in how they carry themselves. To replace the wrong story with the one that was always true. You were never rejected, and now finally you are going to know it. If this reading found you today, if something here lifted the weight of a story that was never accurate and gave you the true version to stand in, instead stay close. Subscribe and come back, because the story of what becomes possible when the misunderstanding is finally replaced by the truth is one worth witnessing all the way through. And the next reading will be there for every honest step of what the truth makes possible.